This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A search warrant made public Friday confirms federal agents removed top-secret documents when they searched former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate last week. The top Democrat and Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee had made a joint request for lawmakers to be allowed to review the classified documents seized by the FBI. Democrat Mark Warner and Republican Marco Rubio made the request Sunday to the Justice Department and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. On Friday, the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida unsealed and released the warrant signed by the federal magistrate judge who approved the raid. The warrant revealed Trump is being investigated for 3 federal crimes: violating the Espionage Act, obstruction of justice, and criminal handling of government records. The FBI reportedly seized 11 sets of classified documents during its search, including documents marked as top secret SCI, which stands for sensitive compartmented information, one of the highest levels of classification. Last week, the Washington Post reported part of the FBI search focused on classified documents related to nuclear weapons. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi addressed the raid Friday.
There are laws against the improper handling of this material. There are laws against that, and we have to recognize that this information, as it is coming across, and we'll know more later, is highly classified, well above top secret. It is again higher than top secret. It's top secret SCI. It is it's about our national security, as we are told, and we'll see.
Donald Trump's response to the FBI search of his Mar-a-Lago estate has shifted day by day as more information comes to light. He's called the probe a hoax. He's claimed to have declassified all the documents at Mar-a-Lago. And he's demanded the FBI return some documents, claiming they're protected by attorney-client and executive privileges. Meanwhile, backlash against the FBI, especially online, is growing across the country following the search. CNN reports the FBI is investigating an unprecedented number of threats against FBI agents and property over the past week. The FBI and Department of Homeland Security has also issued a joint intelligence bulletin warning of violent threats against federal agents, court officials, and government facilities. Last week, the Cincinnati FBI office was attacked. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky tweeted, quote, "The Espionage Act was abused from the beginning to jail dissenters of World War I. It's long past time to repeal this egregious affront to the First Amendment." Again, those the words of Rand Paul. For more, we're joined by Karen Greenberg, director of the Center on National Security at Fordham University School of Law, author of the book Subtle Tools, The Dismantling of American Democracy, From the War on Terror to Donald Trump, and Rogue Justice, The Making of the Security State. Welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us, Karen. If you could start off by talking about this charge, the investigation of espionage against former President Trump, and how significant it is.
Well, I think it's very significant, I think symbolically as well as legally. You know, the Espionage Act actually raises the specter of crimes against the country's national defense. This part of the Espionage Act that's referred to in the warrant is not the part that's about spying, but about the handling of national defense information. In their words, gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information. It's illegal to remove documents related to national security from their proper place, which, as we know, is the National Archives, if they could pose a threat to national security. So that's the big charge that gets all the headlines that was leveled against the president. But there are also that is suspected against the president. But then there are also 2 other issues here, and they carry higher charges, and they're very important. One is the criminal handling of government records, the destruction, alteration, or falsification of government records or documents in investigations. And it's a prison sentence that could be up to 20 years. This is the obstruction of justice charge that is referred to. And finally, there's the potential charge of making illegal the destruction of theft of any government document. And we've seen in the recent past use of this, for example, with Petraeus, and sort of allegations of this with others, but Petraeus is the name that comes to mind by this, and this is punishable by 3 years. So these are incredibly serious charges, not just in the espionage front, but in the other possible charges. Now, he hasn't been charged. This is what just said in the warrant could be what they are looking for. It justifies the search legally, and we'll see what happens. So again, he hasn't been charged, but this is what they're looking for in the documents that they took away. And remember that some of the documents they took away were reported to be classified. So we'll see what happens.
So let's talk about the Espionage Act. We've seen it evoked against Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, Thomas Drake, reality winner. Under the Obama administration, the Espionage Act seemed to be used to squelch dissent by whistleblowers. And now you see those on the right raising these issues.
Right. This is sort of history turning itself on its head. Yes, Obama used the Espionage Act to go against whistleblowers successfully, more than any other president in U.S. history in that way. But the Espionage Act, started in World War I and was used primarily at the time to prosecute successfully those who opposed the war, World War I, and enlistment in the war. And so, it's been used during the McCarthy era. It was tried to be used against Daniel Ellsberg over the Pentagon Papers. It has a long history of not really being about what it's being used for now, which is the abuse of power. This is the suspicion: the abuse of power at the absolute highest level of government to harm the country, as opposed to these prior incidents we've referred to, which were people who were trying to leak information in order to bring to light some things that they thought and others thought were things that the government shouldn't be doing. And so the difference between dissent and the use of the espionage to prosecute dissent and the abuse of power in a way that potentially harms national security, I would argue, are two very different things. And again, I think the country needs to have a discussion about this. But right now, we need to handle what happened, what those documents were about, if we can find out, and what the president was intending, the former president was intending by holding on to these documents.
And the issue that they might be connected to nuclear secrets, what that means?
Well, that means a number of things. One, it obviously is the sort of one of the scarier things that you could be worried about in terms of holding on to classified information. It also means, though, going to the guilt of the president and former president and what he did, was that the president has claimed he can declassify information, and we think this is going to be part of what is said by his defense team, and that he could sort of take a magic wand and just declassify things. When it comes to nuclear issues and nuclear weapons, that is not. First of all, it's not necessarily the case anyway without going through a series of procedures and conversations and document by document removal of these from, a large cache that you're going to turn over to the National Archives. But when it comes to nuclear issues, it's actually a different standard, and the president does not have the right to do this just the way he's claiming, and this is regulated by the Atomic Energy Act. So I think it's rather significant that it's been mentioned and reported that this may pertain to some nuclear issues.
So let's go to what Trump and his supporters are claiming, that Trump used his presidential authority to declassify all the documents in question before leaving office. This is Republican Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota speaking on Meet the Press.
I think constitutionally, back, I believe it was in 1988, there was a Supreme Court decision, U.S. Navy versus Egan, in which they actually talked about whether or not a president could classify and declassify, and it's never really been litigated, but it appears that a president can classify or perhaps declassify information. And if that's the case, then the question would be, and I think it will be litigated as this moves forward, whether or not that was completed while the president was in the White House at that time.
So this is very interesting, and John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, said when he was National Security Advisor, he was never told that things were just blanketly declassified. But this issue that the president having them just meant they were declassified, taking them to Mar-a-Lago.
Well, you can sort of understand from the former president's point of view why he would want to say that, because it gets him out of the more serious charges about mishandling classified documents, which brings, which brings very high charges. And so I think I understand it from the point of view of the defense, but it's not accurate. When you declassify a document, if you want to declassify a document and you're a president, there are procedures, there are rules, there are conversations. There should be a record of that, getting to the point about this willful misuse of records within this presidency. And we don't know whether there will be something in what they took from Mar-a-Lago last week, whether there will be something that shows documents that he went through procedures to declassify. But it's not just a carte blanche on declassifying a whole set of information. This is a scrutinized, articulable distinction about what should be classified and what wasn't. And so we'd have to see what those conversations were, if they took place, whether there's a record. And to this point, we haven't seen that.
Can you talk about the verbal attacks on the FBI and the Justice Department on Trump and his allies? The attorney who represents whistleblowers, Mark Zaid, tweeted, quote, Trump, via Breitbart, released unredacted copy of property receipt containing names of FBI agents. Based on his history, this can only be interpreted as intentional to cause these special agents, one of whom I know, and their families grief and subject them to possible threats, Mark Zaid said. Your response, Karen Greenberg.
My response is that this is just a replay on a different level in a different arena of January 6th. This is the call to violence on behalf of the former president and his treatment, this time under the law. And it's a convergence of many things that have been going on in this country for a long time. So we now know the narrative. We now see how it plays out. And it is very serious and it is very dangerous. And this is a pivotal moment. Either as a country, we know how to handle such threats, or we don't. And that includes how we apply the Espionage Act, how we use our courts, how we protect our law enforcement. And this is a pivotal moment, and it matters how this is resolved. It just can't keep going on that the use of the courts, the use of the law, the reliance on the rule of law is countered by a violence that refuses to accept it.
And what about the New York Times reporting this weekend that a Trump lawyer had written to the Justice Department saying that all classified documents had been handed over, when in fact it's clear they hadn't?
Right. So again, this goes to something that we've been seeing throughout the January 6th investigation and elsewhere, which is sort of a willful use of, you want to call it disinformation, of lying, of distorting the record. And it's going to take a long time to put together this story of what actually went on with these documents that were kept at Mar-a-Lago. It's all part of a larger story, which is what went on inside the Trump administration, what's fact and what's fiction, and what that means. And this is one of the most important things about these records that we sort of minimize because we're thinking about the guilt or innocence of the former president, which is that we preserve records for a reason. We preserve them, yes, so that we can understand guilt or innocence, but we also preserve them so that we know what happened in our country, so that we have the historical record, so that we know how to go forward should we decide to take steps towards legislation that will prevent any of this from happening again in the future. So it's not a minor point, and we're going to need to pay attention to this.
And what about many commentators noting that the laws in the warrant, like the Espionage Act, don't deal with classification? This would sort of undercut Trump's arguments around classification or whether they were declassified.
Yes and no, because the classification issue is going to come up, we think, in any kind of investigation going forward. So yes, you could try to separate it out, but when you're talking about national defense information, whether or not it was classified is going to make a difference. And the fact that there are classified documents, whether or not they go after it on that specific point, which I think they will, is what is involved with the issue of, did he do things that could have potentially harmed national security? So the classification issue just sheds a brighter light on that, basic issue, fundamental issue in this case.
As we wrap up, Karen Greenberg, what are you most interested in finding out? And are you concerned about an overall backlash?
I'm always concerned about an overall backlash. I don't think we can worry about it. I think we have to go forward and really find out what happened. When you ask about what's the most concern, we need to know what these documents were, and we're not going to know all of it. Some of it's going to have to be classified, but essentially what these documents were, what countries, if any other countries, were involved or named in these documents, what these documents addressed. And we really need to try to understand what former President Trump intended to do with this material. Why did he keep it? Was it to cover up the crimes from the past, or worries about being allegations that address the past? Or was it information that could have been weaponized for other purposes? We have no idea, but this is what we need to know in coming days.
Well, Karen Greenberg, I want to thank you for being with us, Director of the Center on National Security at Fordham University School of Law. Her most recent book, Subtle Tools, The Dismantling of American Democracy from the War on Terror to Donald Trump.